with them since 2005. So she has got a ton of knowledge. And she does so much more than just outreach for them. She does the one-on-one counseling. She leads the association's early stage dementia support group. She does physician outreach. She's involved with the dementia-friendly Lexington effort. She coordinates and teaches dementia care classes. So she is busy. So I'm really glad that she is with us today. A few housekeeping tips, guys. Okay, so we'll wait until the end of the presentation to do questions, but you can type them in, and then at the end, we'll have April address those. If you could please type in your zip code, just your zip code, not your address, not your name. It's just primarily to help with statistics. That's it. You know, hello, statistics. Please keep the chat box to communicate with us. Use that, and you can either do it privately to Azetta or myself or anybody on the group, or you can do it if you have something to say or a comment to share with the group. You can do it through everyone. And remember, the presentation will be recorded and uploaded via YouTube on our website. Give us a day or two to do that, but that will be for future viewings or if you wanted to share this with a loved one. Anybody have any questions? Thank you, April.
Thanks, Terry. I am so glad to be with you all today because all of my other live programming has been postponed until further notice. So this is a wonderful opportunity for me to tell you all about some great resources and just to let you know that the Alzheimer's Association can be a resource for you during this particular time, but not just now, but always. So we have great resources that I'll tell you about in a minute. But the Alzheimer's Association, our mission is to, one, enhance care and support of all those affected by Alzheimer's and related dementias. So we don't just help families dealing with Alzheimer's. We help families that are dealing with Lewy body dementia, vascular dementia, frontotemporal dementia, whatever the case might be. A lot of what we teach can be utilized for any type of dementia along the way. So we also do fundraising for research purposes. We want to find a cure for all dementias and better prevention, better treatment, whatever that looks like. There are lots of studies throughout the whole world that we are funding. And so that's really exciting. There are some good studies in the pipeline, and we hope that, you know, fingers crossed, prayers all. We support all of that research. And then we also do some training for loved ones and in themselves, as well as programs to help them know how to keep their brain healthy as they age based on the most current up-to-date research. So there are a few research studies that we're a part of. One of those is the US Pointer study. There are at least 5 locations throughout the United States where they're studying things like diet, exercise, nutrition, social engagement, cognitive stimulation. We want to know how much of those things do we really need to age well and prevent or delay onset of the disease. So stay tuned. Hopefully in the next year or two, we'll have some good results from those studies. So Terry invited me to come today to be with you all to talk about behaviors. And so I am assuming that most of you who have tuned in are a caregiver for somebody that does have a dementia. And so I'm going to try to dive deep into some of the things that we see happen that are typical behaviors. And, you know, for some caregivers, they never open a book, they never Google to find out what some of those normal things to expect are. And so kudos to all of you who are taking time out of your day to learn about what the normal kinds of things are that we see with this illness and how we can better address those things. If you notice, our topic is not problem behaviors, okay? That's a misconception that we have a lot of times, that these behaviors are causing problems. Well, behaviors are just a way for people with dementia to express their needs, their communication for that person. So when somebody loses the ability to tell you how they're feeling or what might be hurting because of their inability to communicate with words, they have behaviors to help us figure that out. And so I want you to try to think about that as we move along and change your mindset in how you deal with that and how you perceive it. Because if you think that mom is doing this behavior to drive us nuts or to get on our nerves or to make us angry, that's a big difference when we can say, mom's trying to communicate something that she needs to us. Okay, she's not being difficult on purpose. She's using the tools that she has to help express what she needs. So, big takeaway for today is to try to understand that your loved one has a brain disease. It's not causing them to be difficult on purpose. It's causing them to have to communicate their needs differently to us. So, some of the normal things that we see, and you may have seen some of these in your loved one, or maybe you haven't. Not everyone will experience all of these behaviors, but some do, and they're pretty common. So one of those is hoarding things. So they may, and this is a funny time, we think of toilet paper in the news. Everybody's hoarding toilet paper, it seems like, because you can't find it. But people with dementia may hoard things like cans of tuna fish, or it might be strange things that they're saving. I knew a lady once who saved the rings they hold the milk cap on the milk gallon, and she would save those rings. She had a whole drawer full of those. Another thing we see is rummaging. So looking through drawers, looking through closets, moving things around a lot. That's kind of a normal thing. Cursing. You know, for some people, they may have used those 4-letter words their whole life, but there are some other words that maybe your mom has never said anything like that ever to you. You've never heard her say that 4-letter word. She went to church her whole life, participated in Bible studies, and here she is cursing all the time, and you are just shocked. So that's kind of one of those normal behaviors that we see happen, because that front part of the brain that tells you things to say or not say, or things that are appropriate or not appropriate, it doesn't work as well anymore. And so any thought that the person might have comes right out of their mouth. Another behavior we see a lot is pacing back and forth or wandering, and we'll talk more in depth about that. Sometimes people will rock back and forth. If they're in a chair, they'll just rock, rock, rock. That's normal. Repeating themselves, repeating the same question, repeating the same word over and over again. Perseveration, that's saying the same thing or doing the same thing over and over. That's a common behavior. Forgetting, that's a normal thing that goes with this illness. Shadowing is another common behavior. And whenever I have a live audience, I love to demonstrate shadowing to people, because a lot of people don't know what it is. So if I was with Bonnie, I see you're on there, Bonnie. If I stood right next to you, stood maybe just right up close as I could be, right next to you, that is shadowing. And for people with dementia, they tend to shadow their loved ones who provide care for them a lot, because that caregiver is their sense of security. And so if a caregiver leaves the room, maybe you have to go to another room to get something, your person may follow you because they can't see you in the room where you just left them. If you have to go to the bathroom, they may want to go with you. So that happens because you're a sense of security for that person. Another common behavior that we see is suspicion, or accusing others of taking things, to the point where people become paranoid that everyone's trying to steal from them. It could be just one person they accuse over and over of taking their things. And so this is one of those normal things that we see because the brain can't remember that this person just put something in a drawer. And so maybe they go and look for the item and they can't find it. And so they don't remember putting that thing away. And so they may accuse whoever is in the home with them that they took it because they just can't remember that they misplaced it. Sometimes that accusation and accusing others and suspicion is legitimate. So we have to be careful about that because sometimes family members will steal money from people with dementia, from their own family members. So if this is happening, you know, be a detective and investigate to see what's really happening. We had a lady that I worked with long ago who would actually hide the comb that she used to brush or to comb her hair every day. She would put it in a potted plant because she was afraid someone would take her comb because she had misplaced it in the past and couldn't find it. So this would happen over and over where she would accuse different family members of taking it. So, and we'll talk about how to address that when that happens. Another thing that we see is aggressive behavior. Sometimes people will become combative, not necessarily all the time. So we have to be cautious with that. And we'll talk more about aggressive behavior in a few minutes. Another thing we see that is common are hallucinations. So people thinking that they see things or hear things. We also see delusions happen. And so, you know, are those things problematic? Well, it depends on the person and it depends on what they are hallucinating. If the hallucination brings them joy or doesn't disrupt their day-to-day life, then it's okay for them to have that hallucination. But if that hallucination is causing them a lot of anxiety and fear, we need to figure out how to really respond to that hallucination. All right, so at the end of today's program, I hope that you will be able to identify some common triggers for behaviors that are associated with dementia. And we'll talk about a process for assessing and identifying those challenging behaviors. And hopefully we'll have some strategies to address the behaviors. So there are some triggers that could cause some of these behaviors for people. And so the first trigger that I want to talk about is pain or discomfort. And so with dementia, the symptoms and behaviors that we see are usually very gradual. So if you see that your person with dementia suddenly has a big change in their behavior, it is quite common that it could be something physical going on for them, like an infection. Urinary tract infections can happen to really change a person's behavior, and any kind of infection could do the same. So pay attention to your loved one's sense of pain or discomfort. If they express, if they have physical expressions to show that they're uncomfortable, examine that environment, see what's going on, see if the room is too hot or too cold, or maybe they're hungry or thirsty, or maybe they really do have a pain going on. So that's one trigger. Another thing that we see that might trigger some behaviors is overstimulation or boredom. And a lot of times with the boredom, we can see people that may wander more frequently if they don't have an activity to do to keep them busy. For overstimulation, you know, and it varies person to person, but with overstimulation, we may see things at home that are too noisy. We may see several family members together with that person that may cause more disruption rather than one-on-one engagement for that person. So it just depends on your person. And as we move along, I want to encourage you to be as familiar as you can with your loved one, even what I like to call their life story, because the more that you can know about your loved one, the better care you're going to be able to provide for them. Another trigger that we see is fear or frustration. So emotional needs of people. So if they're scared or if they're mad and angry about something, you'll see more behaviors that you don't like coming out of them, but it's their way of communicating that their emotional needs. Another trigger that we find that can cause behaviors is unfamiliar surroundings. So leaving their familiar environment. Hospitals can be a very unfamiliar surrounding to a person with dementia. It could be even going across town to visit a family member or friend that they're not familiar with that home. So any type of unfamiliar situation may be a trigger for behaviors. And then another trigger that we have found is complicated tasks. And so as the disease changes the person and as it changes the brain, things that you and I take for granted that are easy, simple tasks may not be so easy for your loved one. And so those tasks can cause frustration for your person. They can get angry, they can leave the house, they can slam something, hit something. They could get mad at the person that's asking them to do that task. So an example of that is, maybe mom has always helped with the family dinners. Maybe that's been her role for the last 50 years. And so now mom is having difficulty understanding how to do things and where to place things correctly. And you ask mom to set the table. And mom just looks at you with a blank stare and goes and sits on the couch. She doesn't know what to do, right? So we've overwhelmed her by asking her to do such a big task. So we may need to, instead of giving her that phrase of set the table, we may need to say, hey, mom, come with me. Let's set the table together, and hand her the forks and show her where to put them at the table, and then hand her the spoons and show her where to put them. So we have to simplify the larger task for the person. Other tasks that seem to get harder as the disease goes along are things like personal care, taking a shower and bathing. Those are big tasks for a person with dementia because they don't understand the right order to sequence things. They don't understand when to turn the water on or when to wash their hair. And, when I say wash your hair, there are lots of steps involved in that. There's finding the right bottle of shampoo that's in the shower. There is, turning it over so you can get the shampoo on your hand. There's moving your hands to get it lathered up and then putting it in your hair and then knowing to rinse your hair. So that whole task in and of itself is very complicated for people in those middle stages of the disease. So some of these tasks we're going to need to provide more and more hands-on, simplified instruction and assistance for our loved one. So just be mindful when you're asking or suggesting to your loved one to do some of these different tasks that you make them as easy as possible for your loved one, because you'll have less problematic behaviors out of them if you can offer that hands-on assistance. And just think about how you would want somebody to approach it. If you were struggling with all of this confusion and understanding things, what would make it easier for you? And that's how we want you to think about dealing with your loved one. So there are 4 steps that we're going to talk about to assess and understand their behaviors. So those are detecting and connecting with your loved one, addressing physical needs, and then addressing emotional needs, reassessing and planning for the next time. And those things will be in the handout that Izetta is going to send to you. So When we detect and connect, and I brought my little detective hat for you, because I think it's important for us to understand that a lot of these behaviors are not always easy to figure out. Sometimes it takes us asking a lot of questions to really get at the heart of what is going on. So we're going to try our best to join our person's reality. They have a brain disease, so they may not be capable of understanding our reality. So when I tell my dad that there are not pigs in the tree, okay, because he's seeing pigs outside in the tree, it's not going to do any good for me to argue with him that there aren't, because my reality is when I look out the window, there are not pigs in the tree. But his reality is he's looking out the window and there are pigs. And no matter what I say to him, I can't convince him that those trees don't have pigs in them. So we're going to join their reality. We want to try to walk a mile in their shoes, so to speak. And so we're going to try to ask ourselves some questions. We're going to understand the behavior, we're going to ask, and I hope you all can see this, we want to know who is present when this behavior is taking place. And could that person or their response to the situation be a trigger for the behavior? We want to know what happened prior to the behavior starting. So was dad having a good day? Was dad frustrated because he couldn't figure something out that he's never struggled with before? Has anything different happened in the last few moments? Then we want to ask ourselves, where did the behavior take place? Was it something that the person heard? Was it something that they saw? Was it something that they touched that could have caused the behavior? Then we want to know, when does this behavior happen? So I encourage families to keep a log of behaviors or just changes in their loved one. And over time, you may notice a pattern of when things are occurring. So every day at 4, is that when he tends to get upset and notice things? Is it when a particular person comes around? Is it when I want to play the music that I want to listen to rather than the music dad wants to listen to? And then I want to know at the last question, how did I react? As a caregiver, what was my reaction to the behavior? Did I handle it in a good way? Did I get upset? Did I become very emotional, or was I calm? Because that can really make a difference in the escalation of the behavior for my loved one. So we want to also remember as we go along and try to be a detective that our communication style with our loved one can either help or hurt our loved one's behavior. So am I treating them like they're an adult? Am I being kind and compassionate? Or, am I being disrespectful to them? And so that's very important in the way that our loved ones perceive us. They can tell when they're not being treated with respect. And so even if some of the things that they're doing seem to be more childlike to you, they're still an adult, and they are going to do better when they're treated like an adult. One thing I like to tell families, and this is more of a communication talk than a behaviors talk at this moment, but if my tone of voice sounds like I am pointing my finger at them and saying, Mom, it's time to take your medicine. Mom, it's time to take a shower. Then it's time for me to put that finger away and try to come up with a different way to say that. And so I know sometimes in the heat of the moment, it's hard because we are, caregiving for our loved ones. And sometimes we have schedules where they need to do things at the times that we need them to. I understand that completely. But at the same time, it'll take a lot less time if we can treat them with respect and dignity. So if I say, hey mom, let's take our medicine, and I've decided to take my medicine at the same time that she needs to take her medicine, I'm going to get a better reaction out of her than if I put that finger up and say, mom, it's time for your medicine. Okay, because nobody likes to be told what to do. They're adults, and we need to continue to treat them like adults. Okay, moving on. We're going to try to address physical needs first. So what are their medical issues? Have they had any medical changes that you know of? Do they have any physical problems? Are they thirsty? Are they hungry? Do they need to go to the bathroom? Another thing is, are they constipated? Okay, so we need to even think about that. And that's a big transition, early to middle stages, of realizing that sometimes we have to track when they're having bowel movements and when they're going to the bathroom, because that can help us figure out, is that the cause of this behavior? So you may want to start tracking that if you're not tracking that already. Also, another thing for physical needs are lack of social interaction. And so our folks with this disease may be very lonely. So if we could take some time and slow down for them and interact with them, try to find something to do with them, that will be a better thing for them than just the isolation that they may have. And then there are some environmental triggers for discomfort as well. Things like being too hot or being too cold. We've seen people with this disease wear several layers of clothing and they're sweating. And we know that they are not understanding that their body is overheated. And so sometimes that discomfort can cause other behaviors, like maybe they want to leave the room because they're so hot. Well, when they leave the room, they try to go outside and then go down the street, and that's not safe. So if we could address that discomfort at first and get them some clothes that are more comfortable for them, that may be helpful. Sometimes pants are too tight. So if your person wears pants with buttons, you may unbutton those, or you may want to get some pants with elastic so that they're more comfortable. All right. Then we want to address emotional needs. So quite often our folks will be anxious, they'll be frustrated. And so if we can address those feelings for them without always addressing facts that are associated with them, that will be helpful. We need to use the knowledge that we have of our person, of their preferences, to provide interventions for them. And so sometimes if your person's anxious, maybe they just need you to slow down and sit by them for a few minutes. Maybe hold their hand or put your arm around them and let them know that you're there for them and you're still there and you're going to continue to be there and they can count on you. If you can get them to that point where they start to be relaxed, you may even want to put some quiet music on that they like. Not something new on the radio, but something older and familiar to them that might be more soothing. All right, gonna keep moving along. Once we've addressed physical needs and emotional needs, hopefully we've figured out what's gonna work, and then we can reassess and plan for the next time. So I encourage families, keep a log of what's been happening with your loved one. Try to notice any changes. Try to jot down things that you did to help intervene in that behavior. Also try to jot down things that didn't work so that you don't continue to do those things. And let everybody know that's there in your family that's interacting with your person what works and what doesn't work, so that everybody can kind of be on the same page and be helpful. All right, so we can apply those steps of detecting and connecting, addressing physical needs, and then emotional needs, and then reassessing and planning to any behavior that we may see. And so I've sent out a handout, and these will be in that handout when you receive it, but I want us to go through some behaviors and see what we might try to do. So I'm going to read you a little story, and this is a story about Alice. And Alice is a 75-year-old woman with Alzheimer's disease. She was pacing the hallways in her house in the evenings, saying, "I need to go, I need to go." She would not stop walking, even for meals. Her family would give her sandwiches to eat while she was walking. Though she had a cane to use, she would get blisters on her feet and had lost weight from all of this walking. Her family would ask Alice to sit down, but as soon as she sat down, she would immediately get up and start pacing again. So that's Alice. And she's got a lot of anxiety or agitation. She's restless and pacing. And what should we do with Alice? Okay, so how are we going to address this behavior? First, we're going to put on our little detective hat, and we are going to listen to the frustration with her and try to understand the feeling. So her husband, Bill, who cares for her, he watched her for a little bit. Okay, so one big piece of this is take a step back and observe. Watch your loved one for a little bit and see what's really going on. So when she was walking, she was hunched over. And when sitting down, she had a pained look on her face. So those are ways of her to communicate by the look on her face and her body language. So were there any triggers for her behavior? Well, I told you earlier to try to know as much as you can about your loved one. So I don't know how much you know about your specific loved one, but it's important to know if you want to provide really, really good care, you should sit down and try to come up with a list of 50 to 100 things about your loved one. And if that sounds like too many, start with 10 and build on it. So Bill was observing Alice and looking for triggers, and he remembered she had worked as a nighttime nurse. So does that explain any of her behavior to us? Okay, so she used to do rounds in the hospital at night. And so right now for Alice, she's starting to do these rounds in the evening like she would have done at the hospital when she worked. So another thing with this is that we might want to look at sundowning behavior, because sundowning occurs in the late afternoon, early evening time, where people get more confused. You know, the exact reasoning for sundowning, we still don't have that, but we do know that a person with dementia, their brain has to work overtime all day. So think about you as a caregiver. If you've ever worked by 4 or 5 o'clock, you're tired and ready to go home. Well, for people with dementia, their brain is exhausted by that time, and so they may be more confused. That could also be a time of day when, as caregivers, we're at home and we may be trying to get more things done at home. We may be trying to make a meal in the kitchen, and maybe that's kind of noisy. Some of us may try to do that by ourselves, and we leave our person by the TV. So we've got to be careful about that time of day too. So maybe if we include our person in the task that we're doing in the evenings, maybe if we provide an activity that's a calming activity for them in the evenings, maybe if they take a short nap or 2 during the day, that might be helpful for sundowning behavior. So just be mindful of that possibility. So then with Alice, we want to explore whether those behaviors occur with certain people or around certain activities. So we also want to address with Alice right now the pain that she may have because of her behavior. So her behavior is that she is pacing and wandering. So as a result of that behavior, her feet are getting these blisters on them. Also, as a result, she's not eating a lot and she's losing weight. So we have to address those physical issues. So also, she's hunched over and looks to be in pain by her facial expressions. So we would want to examine her feet more closely. We might want to get her better shoes if she's going to be walking more. Is it always a good idea to stop the behaviors from happening? It depends on what the behavior is. If she seems to be content doing the behavior of pacing and doing her rounds, we may want to join her in that reality and play the part of a patient or another coworker. We may want to say, Alice, it's time for dinner. It's time for dinner break here at the hospital. Why don't we sit down and grab some dinner and then we'll get back to our rounds in a little while. Okay. In that way, you've addressed that she's got food, right? If she takes a break that's long enough to eat. So those are just some examples of how we can help Alice in this situation. Another thing is with Alice, she could have a urinary tract infection if she looks to be in pain like that. So we'd want to, talk to the doctor and ask if that may be what's happening with Alice as well. Also want to make sure that she's not having other physical issues like thirst or even being more hungry. And maybe we need to allow her to have a bigger meal during the daytime hours so that she's not losing so much weight by missing that evening meal. So we have to be flexible as caregivers too and try to adapt what we're doing to our person. All right. We're going to talk about confusion and suspicion in just a minute. Let me find my notes. All right. This is another situation with Alice. And Alice's family, they come to visit as evening time begins. She becomes suspicious that people are trying to get into her house and they're watching her through the windows. She becomes suspicious of her family for not making those people go away and that they all must be conspiring together with each other. So again, with Alice, we put on our detective hat. So this is evening time again. So when is the behavior happening? It happens in the evenings. With whom does this behavior happen? Well, when her family comes by to visit. And it happens every night. And how does it manifest itself? Well, she seems to be looking out the window and she sees them coming. And so she gets suspicious. She doesn't understand necessarily who they are and what reason that they're coming there for. So what about that environment is going on? What's confusing about that environment? And then are they reacting to something that's really happening or not so much? Or is it a misperception of our reality? So with a family coming to visit, that is a good thing in and of itself. However, the way she perceives them coming is the problem. And so that could be a trigger. Maybe the family needs to stagger their visiting time with her. So is there anything physical going on with Alice at this time? Well, it could be the sundowning piece because it happens in the evening time. I don't know that it would be related to anything else physically right then and there. There are no other things that seem to point to that. What about emotional? The emotional need that she has is that she's scared, she's confused, and she's suspicious. And so that's what we have to address. So is there anything in the environment that we can change to help alleviate that suspiciousness? Can we close the curtains so that she can't see out at that time? Can we change the environment so that they stagger those visits, or maybe only one of them comes at a time instead of all of them at once? So I think those are some ways to get us thinking in the right way to help Alice. For emotional needs, would it be helpful if we told Alice, "Oh, Alice, we're just here to visit you. We're not, trying to do anything awful." Would that be helpful to her? It depends. Depends on how real that feeling of suspicion is for her. And so remember that piece about joining her reality. She is very suspicious at this time. And so we have to join her and not try to convince her of our own reality. That, Alice, we're just here to visit you. We're trying to be nice. We brought you dinner. That doesn't always work. So that convincing is a really hard thing that seldom really works with our people with dementia. So let's see. I wanted to also talk about the suspiciousness piece, because for those of us that have family members who are suspicious of us in our caregiving role or family relationship, it's hard not to take those comments personally. And so I want to encourage you to realize that when your mom or dad or spouse is accusing you of something, it's the disease causing them to feel that way in most circumstances. And so over time, I hope that you can develop a sense of understanding that this is the disease. It's not really my parent accusing me of all of these awful things. When, as caregivers, we're trying to do the best that we can to help our loved ones in all of these situations. But for our loved ones, they can't quite grasp and understand everything that's happening around them. And so I think if we could try to develop some patience and understanding and try not to take things so personally, that it'll make it a little bit easier. Won't make it easy, but it will help ease that feeling. So I am running out of time, and I want to take questions in just a minute, but I want to let you know that the Alzheimer's Association does have services that can help you at any time. We have a 24-hour helpline, and that number is 1-800-272-3900. We have master's level social workers that can help direct you. They can help listen. They can make referrals. They can talk about any situation related to dementia, and they're always standing by to help. So 1-800-272-3900. We have a website that is full of information for caregivers and for people with dementia. And that website is www.alz.org. So www.alz.org. And then we also have some great online webinars and programs by phone every month. And they've been going on for several years now, but a lot of people don't know about them. And so we try to offer 3 different webinars each month. You can find out what those are at www.alzwebinars.org. And then we do one program by phone every month, and that website is www.alzphoneprograms.org. www.alzphoneprograms.org. All right. So Azetta and Terry, is it okay to take questions now?
Yes, go ahead and take questions. You can check the chat box to see if anyone wrote any questions.
Okay,
See the chat box?
I do.
Okay.
All right, I don't see any questions so far. If you do have a question, type it in. And as I wait for questions, I'll talk a little bit more about wandering, because wandering is one of those things that can be really dangerous, especially even here in the Lexington area. Since Friday, we've had at least 2 people with dementia who have gotten lost. And, you know, I don't usually keep up with all of those folks that wander, but recently I've known both of them. And so that is a big concern for me. But 6 out of 10 people that have a dementia will wander at some point during their illness. And that could mean not necessarily getting lost, but it might mean that they're looking for the bathroom in their own home. Okay, could be as easy as that. So what we try to do with wandering is, number one, you know, don't leave your person alone. Don't leave them home alone if they're not safe to be left home alone. Typically when people ask, is it safe for my loved one to be home? We do a little safety check with them. If there were a fire in your home and you weren't there as the caregiver, your person's all alone, would they know what to do if there was a fire? And so typically, if the person with dementia can say, I would get out of the house and I would call 911, and they could physically do that, those are usually the questions that we ask to know that they're safe. But we also have to look at the physical safety of your loved one. Do they have falls a lot? That's a big red flag to us in leaving them by themselves. So we want to know that they can be left alone. We want to know that they have the cognitive ability to know if a stranger comes to the door, are they going to be safe? Will they know not to let a stranger in? Okay, we see a lot of our seniors get taken advantage of because of that inability to cognitively understand that this is not safe. So be mindful of that. So people that wander, what are some things that we can do to try to prevent them from wandering? So one of the things that we like to think about is, what are those triggers for wandering? Sometimes it's a physical need. They're trying to get to a bathroom. They're trying to, you know, find something to drink. They're trying to get out of a room that's too hot or too cold. Sometimes it could be an emotional need. You know, I might think, if I'm a person with dementia, I might think that I'm still working and I've got to get to work. So get out of my way. I'm getting out of here to go to work. I'm going to be late. Okay. Sometimes people wander because they don't have enough to do and they're bored. So we've got to find some activities for them to do. So those are ways on the prevention side. So when we're reassessing, you know, we found our loved one, how do we not let this happen again? Let's examine what that environment looked like for them before they started wandering and what we can do to address it. Sometimes we have to find a path in our home that's a safe path for them to walk on. So getting rid of clutter in the hallways. Maybe they have a great path from the back door going outside to the front door, and that's their normal path. We had a lady that would pace all the way around our day center. She would go outside and she would come right back in, but it was the same loop every time. She just had to be moving. So is there a safe path for your person at home? There are lots of different activities for people with dementia. And I encourage you, you know, as the disease progresses, the person is going to lose the ability to initiate activities for themselves. And so as caregivers, we need to come up with activities to do with our loved one, or at least to get them started if they can get started and then keep going with the activity. Right now, and any time for people with dementia, we need some things for them to do at home, So things like folding laundry, polishing silverware, sorting things, maybe helping clean out a closet. Walks are good. Games might even be fun. Looking at old family photographs may be a good activity for them. We want them to feel as useful as possible. So if you can come up with something to help them feel like they are doing something helpful, it could be baking, it could be something they used to do that they may just need a little bit of extra assistance with. Those are all good things to try. If you play games with your loved one and they can't quite remember the rules anymore, play with their rules, the new rules that they're making up, because we have to be flexible so that they can feel like they are contributing and they're part of the family still. So we want to just keep looking at those things, keep trying our best to, make our environment something where the person is content. The more content they are, the less likely they're going to be to wander. All right, I've got a couple of questions. This one is from Jan. What's the best way to connect with a loved one who is in a facility out of state? Oh, that's a good question. And right now, our loved ones may be in a facility right here in our own town, and we can't even go visit them. I know I have a family member in a skilled nursing facility here in town, and we can't even visit her. So what are we doing to connect? If you have a great staff member at that facility, if there's even just one person that you could contact and ask them, is there a way that you can do some online stuff with your person? Maybe that person has a cell phone or an iPad and you can FaceTime with that person. Even being able to see them on the other side of the screen gives you peace of mind that they're okay. And I think right now everybody needs that during this virus that's going around. Other ways to connect with people in facilities, if, months from now and we get to go visit again, or maybe next month, I don't know when that will be, but phone calls may be good. I don't know if that person has a phone in their room or not, but again, reaching out to a staff member that you trust that can be that conduit, that liaison to help you connect with your person. Music is a great way to connect. Maybe you can have them play a song for your loved one and you can see that on FaceTime or Zoom or some other type of interfacing. Music's a great way. Giving compliments to your loved one are good ways to connect. Those are just some suggestions. I think our distance can really be a barrier to connecting as the disease progresses and they get into those later stages, because touch becomes so important. So making sure that somebody is there to hold a hand with your loved one is so significant at this time. All right, another question. Who is the best person or agency to contact to discuss issues related to the care of residents with Alzheimer's at nursing homes, especially at this time right now? The best person, to discuss issues related to care. So that would depend on the facility that your loved one is at. Usually there is a social worker at each facility. So I would start there with any concerns that you might have. Typically they do care planning meetings that you can bring things up at. Right now they may not be doing live care planning meetings, but they should be doing a phone call at least for care plan stuff with your loved one. And then, whether this is during this time of the virus or another time when things are normal again, if you don't feel like you're getting good service at the facility your loved one is at, you may want to contact the local ombudsman office, because they can be that mediator between you and the facility so that your person gets the best care possible. All right. Any other questions?
What time do you go back in session?
But it's using team script, so
All right.
really just